This $28 device pulls electricity from the warmth of the ground itself. It needs no solar panel, no fuel, and no moving parts. And it does its best work exactly when solar does its worst at night, in the dead of winter, even under a foot of snow. Because by January, the soil beneath your feet can run 10 degrees warmer than the air above it. And that standing gap is a power source. The physics behind it has been running NASA's Voyager probes for nearly 50 years without a single recorded failure. What it makes is a small, steady trickle, but it flows in the dark all winter long. It's called a thermoelectric ground harvester, built on the Seebeck effect. By the end of this video, you'll know how warm ground becomes current, what the graphite sheet really does, and how to build one yourself. Let's dive in. Every solar panel on Earth has the same 4 blind spots, and they arrive on schedule. The first is night. Every night, without exception, production goes to 0, and in winter, that 0 stretches past 14 hours. The second is winter itself. Short days, a low sun, thick cloud. Across the coldest months, even a well-placed panel delivers a fraction of its summer output. The season when you need power most reliably is the season it produces least. The third is snow. A few inches of it, and a panel is not a power source anymore. It is a white rectangle. It can stay blanked for weeks at a time, and it will not clear itself. And the fourth is shade and burial. Under a tree canopy, under a bridge deck, under the soil, a solar cell is dead weight. It has to see the sky, or it is nothing. Now look at which devices actually live in those blind spots. Soil probes on farms, moisture sensors buried under fields, monitors bolted beneath bridges, tucked into forests, left on remote sites through the winter. Precisely the machines that must run unattended for years are stationed precisely where solar cannot follow them. So the fallback is a battery. And a battery is a countdown. It drains, it dies in the cold, and someone has to go out across mud, snow, and distance to dig it up and swap it. Multiply that by a few hundred nodes, and you have a permanent maintenance route. Forever. Solar is a brilliant employee that does not work nights, does not work winters, and does not work anywhere without a window. But every one of those dark, cold, buried places still has one energy source running through it. Warmth stored in the ground itself. Dig down about a foot, and the ground stops caring what day it is. Below roughly 30 centimeters, soil temperature barely moves. The air above it swings 20 degrees between noon and midnight. The soil shrugs. Go deeper still, and it settles further, holding one slow, steady temperature while the seasons churn overhead. And here is what that stability means in winter. The Earth spent the entire summer soaking up heat, meter by meter, month by month. It spends the entire winter paying that heat back out. By January, the soil a couple of meters down can sit around 10 degrees warmer than the freezing air above it. Think about what that is. A standing temperature difference, warm on one side, cold on the other, holding day and night, with no sun in the sky at all. The ground is a battery, the sun already charged. The only question is how warm dirt becomes electric current. The physics is called the Seebeck effect, and you can state it in one sentence. Join two different conducting materials into a loop, hold one junction warm and the other cold, and a voltage appears between them. That is the entire discovery. Electrons in the warm side carry more energy, and they drift toward the cold side, and a drift of electrons is a current. Nothing burns, nothing spins, nothing wears. The temperature gap itself does the pushing. A device built to exploit this is called a thermoelectric generator, a solid-state slab that turns a temperature difference directly into electricity. Now map it onto your backyard. The warm ground is your hot side. The cold winter air is your cold side. The module sits in between, bridging them, and the gap goes to work. One honest paragraph about the parts, because the title needs a correction and you deserve it straight. The conversion does not happen in the graphite. It happens in a semiconductor called bismuth telluride, a material engineered for exactly this job, wired into dozens of tiny junction pairs inside the module. The graphite sheet is the collector. Graphite spreads heat superbly, better sideways than almost anything you can buy, so a sheet of it gathers the ground's warmth and delivers it evenly across the module's whole face, wasting nothing. Collector and converter, a pair. The sheet feeds the engine. It is not the engine. And one operating truth governs everything downstream. This device runs on the difference, and it spends the difference. As it works, heat flows through the module from warm to cold, and a small share of that flow becomes current. The wider the gap, the more it makes. And on the rare days the ground and the air happen to agree, it makes nothing. It rests and waits for them to disagree again. The last piece is voltage. A small gap yields millivolts far too low to use directly. So, the junctions are stacked in series, and the output feeds a boost circuit that steps the trickle up to something a real device can drink. And if a loop of two materials, making power from a temperature gap, sounds too simple to trust, it has survived the harshest endurance test in the history of engineering. In 1821, a German physicist named Thomas Johann Seebeck watched a compass needle twitch and drew the wrong conclusion. He had built a loop of two different metals and warmed one of the junctions. Nearby, a compass needle swung off north. Seebeck announced he had discovered a magnetic effect, thermomagnetism, heat somehow producing magnetism in the metals. He was wrong about the cause. The needle moved because the temperature gap had driven a current, and the current made the magnetism. But the effect itself was solid, repeatable, real. 2 centuries later, it still carries his name. For its first 100 years, the Seebeck effect mostly measured heat. Those same pairs of junctions, thermocouples, sit inside furnaces, engines, and ovens today, reporting temperature. Useful, quiet, small. Then, engineers turned it into a power source for the most hostile places human hardware has ever gone. They wrapped thermocouples around a core of decaying plutonium, which runs ferociously hot, and let the heat pouring off it toward the cold drive a current. They called it a radioisotope thermoelectric generator. In 1977, NASA launched the 2 Voyager probes, each carrying 3 of them. Nearly 50 years later, both spacecraft are in interstellar space, still running on those same generators, no moving parts, and across more than 24 missions that have flown this technology, not one recorded thermocouple failure. Here is the honest number buried inside that triumph. Each Voyager generator turned roughly 2,400 watts of heat into about 157 watts of electricity. That is close to 6% efficiency. It rode a temperature difference of hundreds of degrees, glowing plutonium on one side, the deep cold of space on the other. The effect is close to immortal. What it pays out depends entirely on the size of the gap you feed it. Your backyard offers a gap of degrees, not hundreds. So the honest question is what the same effect does at human scale, and the answer is already sitting on store shelves. In 2017, a Silicon Valley company shipped a smartwatch with no charger. The Matrix Power Watch ran on body heat alone. Its metal caseback sat warm against your wrist. Its outer face stayed cool in the open air. And a thermoelectric module between them harvested that difference to run the watch. It sold for around $160, and it worked for as long as the wearer had a pulse. Take it off, let it reach room temperature, and it went dark. Put it back on, and the gap returned, and it woke. The engineer's own account is the lesson of this entire video. Their hardest problem, they said, was keeping the cold side cold. If that outer face warmed up to match the skin, the gradient collapsed and the watch stopped. The gap was everything. That same architecture is now going into the ground. Researchers have built batteryless environmental sensors powered entirely by the soil-air difference. A thermoelectric module with a copper rod reaching down into the stable earth on one side, and a finned heat sink standing in the air on the other. No battery anywhere. The soil runs the sensor. And a forest deployment study measured the resource directly soil a couple of meters down, running roughly 10 degrees warmer than ground-level air in January. Exactly the season those sensors are hardest to reach, the gap is at its widest. Be honest about the scale, though. Near the surface, the daily swing is only a degree or two, so these devices harvest microwatts, not watts. Millionths of a watt, banked slowly into storage, then spent in a quick burst. Wake, measure, transmit, sleep. Then wait, and do it again. So, it flies on spacecraft, it sells in a watch, it runs sensors in frozen fields. Which raises a fair question: why is it on no home energy list anywhere? This is where a video like this usually tells you the technology was buried. It cannot have been. It is bolted to the side of Voyager and sold with a wristband. There is no missing lobby here. No absent safety listing. Thermoelectric modules are ordinary, certified commercial parts in cars, in furnaces, on NASA's flagship spacecraft. Nobody is hiding them. The reason they are on no home energy list is arithmetic, and it comes in two layers. The first is efficiency. A thermoelectric generator is a heat engine, and every heat engine that has ever existed is capped by the Carnot limit, the maximum share of a temperature gap that any engine, of any design, can convert. Real thermoelectrics capture only a fraction even of that ceiling. It is why Voyager, riding a gap of hundreds of degrees, still converts only about 6%, and why NASA's newest design manages barely 8%. The second layer is the gap itself. Your backyard offers a few degrees, not a few hundred. And a few degrees, run through a low-efficiency engine, is microwatts. There is one more honest detail. The ground runs warmer than the air in winter and cooler in summer, which means twice a year. In spring and autumn, the two temperatures cross and briefly match. At those crossings, the gap goes to zero, and the harvester rests. So run the home math and be done with it. An American house burns about 30 kilowatt hours a day. This device makes millionths of a watt. It does not power your home, or one room, or a single bulb. Nobody suppressed this. The ceiling is the second law of thermodynamics, and it does not take bribes. But here is the reframe that matters. Because judged as a house generator, this thing fails, and judged on its own ground, it is untouchable. It makes its best power on winter nights, under snow, underground, the exact conditions where a solar panel makes precisely nothing, and where a battery is a liability waiting to freeze. It is not a competitor to solar. It is the answer to solar's blind spots. Solar owns the day. This owns the dark. A buried soil probe wakes for a fraction of a second and sleeps. A temperature logger sips microwatts. A sensor that reports once an hour needs almost nothing at all. That is the honest job of this device. Silent, fuel-free, sun-free power for a low-draw machine stationed exactly where solar cannot serve banking the trickle whenever a gap exists, which in the depth of winter is day and night. It does not replace your power. It keeps a small sentinel alive in a place a battery would die. If you want the full build, the module choice, the heat paths, and the harvester wiring, we put together a complete walkthrough covering everything in this video and more. The link is in the description below. Here is the build, in the order that matters. The converter is a bismuth telluride thermoelectric module, a few dollars. This is the part that actually makes the electricity. Now give it its two sides, because the gap is the fuel. Drive a copper rod or spike down into the ground, toward the stable warmth, to feed the module's hot face and cap that face with the graphite sheet pressed flat against it, so the collected ground warmth arrives evenly across the whole surface instead of just one spot. On the cold face, mount a finned heat sink standing up in the open air, shaded where the winter cold can reach it. Warm below, cold above, module in between. Because that small gap yields only millivolts, wire the module into an ultra-low voltage boost harvester, a chip built to start from as little as 20 millivolts and bank its output in a supercapacitor. Total lands around $28, most of it the module and the harvester board. To scale it, add modules or reach deeper, where the ground holds warmer and steadier through the winter. One critical warning, and it is the difference between a device and a paperweight. The whole machine lives or dies on keeping its two sides apart. Insulate between the warm copper path and the cold sink, because any thermal shortcut lets the heat sneak around the module instead of through it. The gap collapses and the output dies. The watch engineers called this their hardest problem. It will be yours too. And set your expectations honestly. Microwatts, banked with patience, and 2 quiet pauses each year around the spring and autumn crossings when the ground and the air briefly agree. The limits here are real, and they are exactly the point. A $28 ground harvester makes microwatts, not watts. It will not run an appliance, a light, or a phone. It runs a sensor that sips and sleeps. Its output follows the gap widest in deep winter, and briefly gone twice a year when the ground and the air cross. The energy is free the way wind is free. The sun charges the ground, the earth pays it back out, and you intercept a sliver of the flow. But the machine is still a heat engine, and the second law sets the ceiling on what a sliver can become. What $28 buys you is a working piece of the most durable power principle humanity has ever proven. The same effect, still running. Voyager, half a century out, scaled down to keep a buried device alive through the exact months that blind a solar panel and drain a battery. This is not a suppressed miracle. It is a specialist with a 200-year record, doing one job that almost nothing else can do. Knowing that difference, a specialist from a miracle, a temperature gap from free energy, is the whole point of this channel. If discovering the honest, unglamorous corners of engineering matters to you, subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure this kind of knowledge keeps being found. We will be tracking all of it as it develops. So here is the question. Would you bury $28 of module, graphite, and copper to keep a sensor alive through 10 winters on nothing but the warmth of the ground? Or would you still drop in a coin cell you have to dig up and replace every spring? I'd genuinely like to know. Drop it in the comments.